Hello, this is Mike Wilkes, Chief Information Security Officer at SecurityScorecard, and I'm here to talk with Ryan Slaney from our Threat Intelligence team about some of the things that you might want to be considering given the recent rise of a persistent threat actor named Lapsus. So, Ryan, thank you for taking time to talk with me right now.
Yeah, no problem. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, the first question for those that don't know, what do we know about Lapsus? Who is Lapsus? They're a fairly recent player in the APT space.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you mentioned, they are very new on the scene, essentially. So we've really only officially heard of Lapsus as of December 10th, 2021. That's when they started their Telegram channel, what they use to kind of advise of the breaches and the victims that they have. They also use it to answer questions and even take polls of their of their followers of whose information they should release next. But our research has actually shown that they've been around a little bit longer than that. So we can see earlier signs of their existence back to June 2021.
Hmm.
And that's in association with a hack against Electronic Arts FIFA 2021 source code, the very popular soccer game that was released.
Oh, I heard about this one. They bought a $10 Slack token and socially engineered themselves into a $28 million theft.
Exactly. So an extremely unsophisticated, very inexpensive attack vector to develop and exploit, and it was very successful in this case. So they entered via Slack. They were able to use some social engineering to get into more information, more data from user accounts, and ultimately got access to the source code.
What I had read was that they knew that the customer support team had had a party the night before they reached out. And with this Slack token, they were able to send a message to the support Slack channel saying, I lost my phone last night at the party. Can somebody reactivate my new mobile number? And so that's how they social engineered themselves into a multi-factor auth setup, right?
That's exactly what they did. So it's extremely smart, not very technical, but again, highly successful. So it's a classic example of social engineering, understanding their target, doing some research on what went on, previously, the events leading up to the next day, and obviously they took advantage of the fact that there might have been some foggy heads in the IT department that day, and we're able to get in and get a foothold. So that was the first time we heard the name Lapsus, because in online chat groups, a individual or group using the call sign Lapsus was who took credit for that account, for that leak.
And one of the things I thought was interesting, some of the advanced persistent threat groups are low and slow. They don't want to give away their presence. APT 29 with the SolarWinds attack and backdooring the software enabled them to get into FireEye, for example. And they didn't want to blow their cover and just do a smash and grab. And so they were able to remain with remote, and persistent remote access. And that, to me, I think characterizes the actual definition of advanced persistent threat. And so Lapsus, I think, is a little bit different because it feels like their event horizon is to capitalize much more quickly on what they can do with the credential that they've breached within the next 6 to 12 or 24 hours. So I don't know that I would call them in the same category of these other APTs. Would you agree?
I would definitely agree with that. They wouldn't be considered as an advanced persistent threat. Advanced tactics, no. They're using social engineering. They may be good at it, but it's not an advanced technical threat. The
Hmm.
persistence mechanism isn't of their own making, so it could be because they've compromised an account and they forwarded some emails and inboxes to maintain the persistence, but it's not an advanced way of maintaining persistence. And you're absolutely right about the behavior. It's not low and slow. It's completely smash and grab. It's we've compromised this. What can we take advantage of? What can we get out of it immediately in order to get attention, not only of the victim, but of cybersecurity researchers, news media, everyone else. They're more than willing to answer questions from pretty much anyone on their Telegram channel, whereas a state-sponsored APT is never going to own up to any activities they've conducted, let alone answer questions about them publicly.
Yeah, and we did learn through unsealed indictments recently that these are literally script kiddies, right? Below the age of 16, doing clever things, hacking billion-dollar organizations. And it really, I think, makes us think twice about some of the qualifications that we might be looking for threat intelligence, and InfoSec professionals. You don't necessarily need to have 10 years of experience and a certification to do this work.
No, absolutely, and it does show the importance of defending your networks from social engineering attacks, because a lot of times CISOs will want to overlook this part of the penetration testing process. Frankly, because it makes the victims feel uncomfortable. They feel duped, and organizations don't want to put their employees in that situation for testing purposes. So they often leave that out of the contract. Whereas that is often the biggest breach that you could possibly suffer is the user, the human behind the machines that have access. They're always going to be your weakest link, no matter how good your technical defenses are.
Yeah, one of the ways I've heard it best put, I think, is identity is the new perimeter. We're not really interested in perimeter based security models now, certainly with zero trust architecture, everyone moving things to the cloud. So I think one of the biggest concerns for CISOs right now, given the nature of Lapsus, and even if Lapsus has been rounded up, or at least some of the members have been charged and identified, there's other groups that are going to do the same thing, right? And so we should be thinking about how do we protect? Obviously, security awareness training and phishing tests, it's no longer an annual thing. I think at least 60-70% of companies are now doing monthly phishing testing, as do we. And I think it's important because you need to flex that skepticism muscle. You need to see plausible calls to action and learn how to not click on them. Because we can't really blame people for clicking. A computer is really just a clicking machine. And so we have to kind of accept the humanity of our colleagues. And that's one of the reasons why we try to incentivize people to report phishing emails and to have that collective awareness of what's going on. But let's turn real quick to the Okta incident, because this involves supply chain attack, where the weakest link was not Okta. The weakest link was one of its subcontractors.
Yeah. So again, very interesting, namely because the target and Okta, what they do and what they provide to their clients. They're a third-party identity service provisioner, essentially used by hundreds, or sorry, thousands of customers at this point. So really, anytime you have an or authentication entity third party that's been compromised, it's going to be a pretty serious deal. And in this case, what we saw too is a very kind of slow response from Okta themselves in terms of the breach. Didn't really formally respond or acknowledge what Lapsus had claimed they had done for, I believe, 10 days or so afterwards. And even then, it was a very small response. That was, oh, we don't believe much had been compromised, when in fact, almost 400 of their customers were directly compromised by the lapse in security that they had at their subcontractor. So it was a fairly big deal. I'm sure it's a big deal for the customers who were affected. And again, Okta really needs to take serious that just because it's a third party provider doesn't let you off the hook to your customers. You are ultimately responsible for their data. And again, you need to be sure that all your vendors, all your suppliers are taking the due diligence and due care to make sure that their security is as strong as can possibly be, and that their users are trained to recognize social engineering attacks as well.
Yeah, I wonder, wouldn't it be wonderful if there was a service that could help you monitor your third parties and understand their security posture changes? But anyway, that's our ratings platform. And of course, if you look at the scorecard for Citel, right, and Sykes, the subcontractor, they had a poor score for the last 12 months. And it's interesting to think about, in my mind, the subcontractor wanted to have good latency, right, low latency, on the Okta tool set. And so they actually set up, from what I read, their own RDP Windows machine in AWS. And then they were RDPing in it from South America. I think it was Costa Rica. And in this case, they were doing their work. And so it was the remote endpoint RDP connection that had been breached, not the actual Okta controls that were running on that virtual machine. Obviously, it's important to monitor your third parties, but also your fourth parties. Meaning, if you put Okta into one of your portfolios on our platform, you want to then be able to discover who are their providers, right, and their subcontractors. And so we have Auto Vendor Discovery, AVD, as part of our platform to help you actually know how to find fourth or nth parties, which are the vendors that your third parties are using to deliver their services.
Yeah, it's absolutely an amazing tool that will help you determine that third and fourth party liability and vendors that you wouldn't normally have access to or have any other understanding of. And this automatically would do it for you. and again, show you where the weak points are in any kind of strategically important supplier, and again, their supplier, the people they do business with, which you may not normally know.
And so our ratings platform is mostly what we call a left of boom technology. Boom being when the shit hits the fan and a breach or event happens, an incident or something. But we recently acquired an organization, a really well-respected DFIR, Digital Forensics and Incident Response, called LifeVars. And so now we actually have a right of boom service protection and offering for those people that have been breached and need help. So thankfully, we didn't receive an email from Okta saying that our platform had been one of the 366 companies that they believed had been compromised. But maybe some of the people listening, out there or watching now did get that email and didn't have a retainer for a DFIR organization on hand to begin investigating. So my first advice to anyone that was looking at when it was an alleged breach and it hadn't been acknowledged yet by Okta was simply to go in and make sure that you review your administrative access logs, make sure that the remote access features for debugging and support via Okta are disabled, which is a default, but it's always good to check the defaults to make sure they haven't changed. And then just review all of the access tokens that have been created since January. So that was my basic advice for what CISO should do in the Okta case. But if you're thinking that you're going to be targeted by a group like Lapsus, besides having good monitoring in place and good incident response and training and testing people, what else have you seen in your threat intelligence work that can help CISOs prioritize, the vulnerabilities that are being actively, probed and prodded, for example?
Oh, in this case, it's tough because there was no 0 day, there was no malware or real technically advanced issue that you can quickly solve by patching or shutting down a port or upgrading a piece of outdated equipment. This was a very simple, again, a $10 cookie that was bought off the dark web that was replayed into a Slack conversation where they were able to go from there and get the access they want. So again, having the awareness of dark web capabilities and what people may know about your company out there is obviously extremely important. So knowing that there is cookies that can be purchased online, had you known that, you would terminate, you would have expired those cookies right away, and they would never have been able to be used legitimately again.
That's true. In the case of Electronic Arts, I don't think they had an enterprise subscription with Slack, which gives you the capability of setting session policy and to have those session tokens be expired. Because at the moment, a lot of people's Slack instances have forever tokens, right? Unless you actively go in and expire them yourself with a script through the API or something, you're running the same risk and exposure that Electronic Arts had.
Yeah, and we've seen this before. I mean, some of the major hackers, and it's funny because they're usually younger, that aren't technically advanced, have used this method before. So several years ago, there was another hacker known as Kareem Baratov, who was arrested just outside Toronto for his role in the Yahoo hacking. That was, I believe, 32 million customers had their credentials leaked, and that was all back to the cookie replay that they were doing. They were able to find a very small niche exploit and use that. And in this case, it was actually taken advantage of by a state-sponsored Russian cyber actor who found this particular hacker and paid him to use that technique to go after millions of email addresses, many of which were important targets to them.
Indeed. I think that's one of the assets that not everyone is keeping track of as well as they should. We think about passwords and we think about MFA, but MFA can be bypassed. And in some of the DEF CON gatherings and RSA conferences and presentations that I've seen on it, there are some techniques. I think one of them was even FireEye had their MFA bypassed, and someone had basically minted a golden Kerberos ticket, and so they were bypassing these protections. So our ability to observe those types of events is going to be limited if we don't even think to review and to maintain token and cookie management for these types of tools that have these deep integrations. Moving forward to the last bit I want to discuss with you. So if Lapsus is kind of the new kid on the block, it's not terribly advanced, but it is using tried and true social engineering techniques, and it's basically able to get a lot of mind share because they're using Telegram, and they're almost a brand that's marketing itself by using that platform to communicate. What can we do to mitigate some of these risks? Because in my mind, it's not the sexy 0 days like you were talking about, right? That someone's taking advantage of and exploiting. It's really just the basics of DNS hygiene and using HSTS headers to encrypt and make sure all of your web traffic is protected. And those are the things that our ratings platform, is able to surface. But what would be your last recommendation for folks to learn from this incident and this new trend, I guess you could say, that not all advanced persistent threats are advanced or persistent. Some of them are moderately talented and they just come and go quickly.
Yeah, I think what's important to remember is the motivation of these individuals. They may not have the skill or the technical know-how, but they're motivated to make a splash, to make money off of any kind of flaws or misconfigurations that they find that's out there. And they're clearly not scared of the consequences of being arrested or being caught. At least it's not evident that they are. So I think that you mentioned this is a hot trend. I think this trend will stick around for a while. We're going to see Lapsus motivate other copycat-like actors to conduct these type of attacks in the exact same manner, because the media, other security agencies have detailed how these attacks were done, and again, it's not very sophisticated. Really, anyone with any kind of basic knowledge of computer security could replicate these attacks. So it's something that we'll likely see more and more. I think we'll see people more, or actors that are more emboldened to engage with the public and get the spotlight. But at the same time, we haven't seen any evidence of Lapsus actually being paid for their efforts. So they were bold and they created a big wave and a surge in the media of reporting, but ultimately there was no evidence that we could find that they were ever actually paid for any of their attacks. And there wasn't a massive gap either between the time that they would advertise having breached a company and then disclosing that information. And usually these actors are in it for financial gain. They won't disclose until they're sure they're not going to be paid. This particular chance, it didn't seem like Lapsus had actually given any time to the companies to even make that decision. So that's a little bit scary when you think maybe you can buy your way out of something, and in this particular case, it doesn't look like you were able to, even if you wanted. And I think that trend may stick around. Again, maybe it's not financial motivation, it's more attention seeking, or the thrill of being able to compromise and disclose that information as well. In conclusion, I think that the best thing to do would be, again, be aware of your own vulnerabilities using products such as our own that will scan across your domain, automatically looking for vulnerabilities that actors may be currently taking advantage of. But again, you touched on it earlier, Mike. You said an incentive environment. I think that's extremely important as a CISO, is creating a culture of awareness and reward for incidents, for cybersecurity incidents. So people that, hey, is this a phishing message? I don't know. Even if the CEO messaged them about some weird request, they should have the authority to question that email and see if it is actually authentic and be rewarded for doing so, versus being either punished or question themselves
in some way.
Yeah, I think that goes a far way. A $10 Starbucks gift certificate for someone that reports a phishing email is a really good way to keep employees who are your front line in the cyber defense world are on guard and really looking for those phishing emails and reporting them in.
Yeah, I think the collective defense approach, in some of our recent phishing tests, we had more people reporting the test than clicking on it. And it's important to have that kind of capability built into your platform that you're using for phishing tests to report. It's usually called like a phish alert button or a phish me kind of link. It automatically downloads the attachment with all the headers and sends it off to the InfoSec team to analyze, because just forwarding the email is not sufficient for us to do an investigation. But I'd like to wrap up with a couple of stats that I like to repeat, and they've changed recently. Our ratings platform is scanning all of IPv4 every day. SecurityScorecard is in the business of identifying risk and helping people mitigate it. And what we see is between 50 and 60 billion vulnerabilities every week across all of IPv4 space. We map that back into a letter grade for about 12 million scorecards. And each one of these shows you the exact detail of the observation and the vulnerable IP and how to remediate it. The other piece that we have is this sinkhole infrastructure, a top 5 sinkhole by some measures. And we see about 700 million events coming in per day from our sinkhole domains. Now, these are command and control beaconing out, malware that's saying, okay, I'm here, what should I do next? So given all of this risk, just a couple of months ago, I was reporting that as maybe 40 to 50 billion. But now it's already increased. So if you go to our trust portal, trust.securityscorecard.com, you can actually see all of these numbers updated every day. And the number of customers that are using our platform and the number of, hopefully, remediations and steps they're taking to fix these vulnerabilities. Because these, again, are basic things, not the sexy 0-day breaking through, hard, elliptical curve Diffie-Hellman encryption or something like that. It's just someone misconfiguring something, having a domain that gets hijacked because they didn't put a DNS lock on it, or not even using HTTPS, right, or SPF records to stop email spoofing. So I would encourage everyone to check out your scorecard. It's free, and you can see what the bad guys can see about you, and hopefully start doing something about it. So thank you, Ryan, for taking time to talk with me and go over some of the lessons to be learned from Lapsus, Okta, and the Electronic Arts breaches.
Thanks, Mike.